Welcome back into the Red Zone podcast. My name is Colten Bartholomew, UW football beat reporter here for the Wisconsin State Journal, joined by longtime basketball and football beat reporter and now columnist Jim Polzin. Jim, how are you doing, sir?
Doing well, thanks. How about you?
Oh, I'm good. We are recording this at noon Wednesday, and Teddy Bridgewater just got announced as the starting quarterback for my Denver Broncos. And I'm going to tie this into the Badgers. He'll be handing off to Melvin Gordon quite a bit. So I'm like somewhat distracted. I'm trying to think of the positive spins on this. I'm more just kind of conceding my goal is 10-7 for the Broncos this year, but that's not too bad. I'll take it.
Probably gets you in the playoffs, right?
I would think so. Right around there. This 17-game schedule is going to take a while to get used to. Just got to be honest.
It really is. I had some guy in the mailbag this week ask me about the Packers record, like the over-under is 11-6, and I'm like, yeah, it's hard to wrap your head around figuring out stuff in a 17-game schedule. So I agree with you.
For sure. All right, so we'll leave that stuff to the side. We've got a lot of college football stuff to talk about, especially with the Badgers here. We're going to start off the podcast, give you a quick rundown here, talking about this alliance between the Big Ten, the Pac-12, and the ACC, an alliance that very much needs a name. We'll get into that in a second. But we're going to talk about just kind of our thoughts on the press conference that the three commissioners held, some of the matchup possibilities that might be down the road for the Badgers, and then just kind of a thought about if you're Paul Chryst, what I can't imagine what he thinks about this, just from a scheduling standpoint, what it might mean for his team. So we're going to get into all of that. We've got the last of our position breakdowns with the cornerbacks, the safeties, and the specialists for the Badgers this season. We're about 10 days out from the opener against Penn State, so we're getting closer and closer as we go along here. And then we've got our first Big Ten picks of the year with Nebraska and Illinois playing on Saturday in Week 0. And I'm glad to report that Jim and I are on different sides of this. So Jim whooped me last year. We'll see how it goes this year, and it's going to start off with a disagreement there. So we are going to get into all of that right after this. All right, Jim, we're back, and let's jump right into this alliance. Both of you and I were on that Zoom yesterday with the three conference commissioners, kind of listening to their reasoning and what they want to do with this. I keep saying alliance, but really it's an agreement. And I think I want to start there. And you wrote about this really well in your column yesterday. Go on madison.com and check out Jim's column. But the fact that this is basically a handshake between these three conferences, which means between 41 universities, with no signed contract, no really formal, legally binding anything, it almost seems like they're destined to fail. I don't know. What was your read on that?
Yeah, that was my initial reaction. I mean, I didn't write exactly those words, but it did seem like kind of something that was, it seems like an idea to me. But not really a formal bond by any means. Like, when Dan Wolken from USA Today jumped in there and asked about the contract situation, I was stunned that they just outright admitted that we have signed nothing. We don't need to sign anything. Trust was a word you heard. A gentleman's agreement, three men looking each other in the eye. It seems so complicated to not have anything formalized. There's three commissioners, three leagues spread over 4 time zones, 41 institutions. That's 41 athletic directors, 41 presidents and chancellors, 41 head football coaches. It's a lot of people, and getting everybody in the Big Ten, which is a 14-team league, to agree to everything is hard enough. I can't imagine now tripling that essentially. And it seems kind of like it's ripe for failure. Now, I will say this: if this is just kind of a show of force with some scheduling mixed in, and it's just kind of this is their way of saying, hey, SEC, we're not backing down. You're not going to push us around. Okay, I get it. But to have a formal press conference and a formal press release, but then not have any sort of formal contracts to it, it just seemed weird to me.
Yeah, Jim, I think you're right there. When you mentioned the show of force, because with the Texas and Oklahoma move to the SEC, it really does seem like all of college football outside of the SEC was kind of on their own, right? And this was these three conferences' ability, or really kind of chance to and you wrote this in your column, to stand up to the bully, right? And I think that there's some value in the idea that these three conferences are going to, at least as much as they can, try to align on the big topics that are going to be coming up in college sports in the next few years, where, continue debate about what NIL rules look like and if it becomes a federal legislation, all the other stuff that you've been hearing, now with conference realignment, to have three of the most important conferences together, I think really is a way of making sure that their voices are heard, and making sure that, we'll see what it ends up becoming of the accusations toward ESPN of how involved they've been in the Texas and Oklahoma move and all this stuff. But from what I keep reading, whenever I, kind of got from the Zoom yesterday, was that these three conferences see what they can offer in terms of football games going into the future being way more valuable than what just the SEC could do. And when you're talking about the amount of television partners that are going to be, streaming TV continues to take more and more of the market share. Like, I think they're looking 5-10 years down the road. They want to be able to negotiate maybe together, saying, hey, like, it's us three together, like, make us, a combined offer, or do something like that, where it's not just ESPN having the SEC network and pumping those games and those types of things. So I think it really is, like you said, a show of force, and trying to get together now, figure out the details later, because the negotiations are going to be in a few years. But if they can start kind of laying the groundwork now, they set themselves up on a good foundation to make as much money as they can. And I think that was one thing that really stuck out to me yesterday, listening to those commissioners, was they kind of tried to sidestep the idea that this wasn't just about money. It's like, you guys have been philosophically aligned, and you can do all that stuff without naming it an alliance, right? Like, this was about trying to have a power play here. Let's not be childish about it.
Right. Absolutely. I think that's an important note too, is that all of them basically came out and said they agree with the expanded playoff, but I think this does kind of hit the pause button a little bit in terms of ESPN just running that whole thing. And they want a voice at the voting table, to let other TV partners at least get in there and have a chance, to open it up to other bids. So and the SEC can't do this without them. So I do think there's a smart play there. And I do like the scheduling component of this. I think that's the one really valuable thing that stands out. But I mean, just going back to what we were saying previously, the idea that this is kind of just thrown together, and they're basically admitting it, like, now is when they start talking about what the details of this are. That to me is just kind of scary to some degree.
Yeah, definitely weird. And one thing that came out of the scheduling component that you mentioned a couple of times is the possibility, and it sounded like it was on the table for both conferences, that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 will have to go from 9 conference games to 8. And I want to tie this into some of the matchup possibilities for the Badgers in the future. But when you talk about the conferences as a whole, going back to what you offer your TV in your TV deals, is a week 2 matchup between Wisconsin and, let's say, Arizona more appealing than having Michigan come to Camp Randall, or vice versa? Like, that's the part where I don't get it, where it's like, I don't understand why you would, if you're already at 9 in your league, why you would drop a game in conference play that has more, I would think, TV value than to add one more crossover game. What are your thoughts on that, Jim?
Yeah, and that's quite kind of when I want more details. I mean, it's really like, like one of the, I think Yahoo Sports, they used an example of Wisconsin playing Virginia and Oregon one year, and Florida State and UCLA the next, which sounds great, right? But to do that, you're going to have to drop a crossover game. Now, which crossover game is that? Is it Michigan? Is it Ohio State? Or is it Rutgers, Maryland, right? If you're dropping Rutgers to give me Florida State, then yeah, duh, it's a no-brainer. Fans would love that, and you could sell that on TV. But if you're dropping Ohio State to give me Virginia, then as a Wisconsin fan, I don't think I'm as happy. And it's hard to analyze this without knowing the dirty details of it. And I think that's going to take time, because like the commissioners were saying yesterday, there's existing deals already. I mean, Wisconsin's playing Utah and Washington State and Virginia Tech and Pitt down the road, right? Those contracts aren't going to be torn up. So that's going to be part of this alliance scheduling format. I want to know more about who else this adds to Wisconsin's schedule and who else it drops, because I do think there's value in playing these Big Ten teams in some sort of rotation. I don't want to see it go 5 years without playing Ohio State during the regular season. That to me doesn't make sense.
I'm with you, and this is something that's a discussion, almost every year in college football. But some of the early season, and not to be dismissive of them, but like the cupcake games, like Eastern Michigan coming to Camp Randall. Why are those important? Well, okay, so it's a home game for Wisconsin, right? And that's the number one reason, the revenue they get from a home game. And then if you're Eastern Michigan, yeah, you're not like a bottom feeder in terms of Division I schools, but the amount of money that Wisconsin pays you to come and play funds a ton of your athletic department. And when you see some of the FCS schools come up and play at Power 5 school, that some of those pay games fund the entire athletic department. So I don't think you're ever going to see the elimination of those games entirely, because there's a whole economic ecosystem there. But like, to me, that would be an example of a game you get rid of to add a Pac-12 team or an ACC team to the schedule, and not lose a Big Ten game, like you said, to lose that rotation and lose those opportunities for crossovers.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and those games are necessary, right? They absolutely have to happen in terms of budgetary purposes. Like Wisconsin's going to want 7 home games every year just to make ends meet, not only for the football program, for other athletic programs within the department. So you got to get to that number. And if you have 4, like let's say they go to 8 Big Ten games, 4 of those are at home, that means you need to have 3 non-conference home games. And if one of those is against a marquee opponent, that means that 2 are going to be bye games. So I don't know. I don't know if those are going away. I mean, and then like you talked about Paul Christ earlier, I don't know that they want to load up on the schedule so much that you're playing 9 conference games and then 2 Power 5, 2 alliance games, and then you're only left with 1 bye game. I mean, then you're talking about, and coaches are concerned about this all the time, getting to 6 wins and being bowl eligible. And so there's a lot to factor in, but I really don't think, I don't see the bye games going away. I mean, I think if they're already talking about taking away a conference game, I think that's the way it's going to go.
Yeah, I was just surprised by that. And I'm glad you brought up Paul Christ, because if I'm Chris or one of these other coaches of an alliance team now, I don't know, like, do I want that? Like, I think you put it well. Like, yeah, I would rather play a Florida State, a UCLA, a Clemson, something like that, USC, other than, and have those games at home, right? I'd rather have that home game versus, whoever, Western Illinois, fill in your FCS school. But at the same time, like, the amount of challenge and how taxing it is, and we've gotten to this point where we were trying to make it that an early season loss doesn't kill you, right? In college football, like that's been one criticism of the systems throughout the years. The early season loss kills you so bad, so it doesn't incentivize the scheduling. That's one solution that the proposed 12-team playoff would do. Like, it's going to reward teams for winning big games, non-conference, but then it's not going to kill you if you were still able to go win your conference after you lost one of those games. But now with this, I just wonder, if you're a coach, do you like what? I'm excited when we get to Monday to talk to Paul Christ again, kind of see what his thoughts are. I'm sure we'll get I haven't put much thought to it type of answer, but
I was just going to say that.
I just really want to see what a coach's perspective on this is, because it's there's a lot of possibilities, but there's a lot of issues that come along with it.
Yeah, it's really one of those, it's a risk reward type thing, right? I mean, there's value to be gained from winning 1 or 2 of those alliance games early in the season. It gives you a little bit of a, it gives you a little bit of a comfort zone. If you get into conference play and lose 1 or 2 games, you can still be eligible for the playoff. And the playoffs can be bigger, right? It's going to be 12 teams. And so those alliance games can be the deciding factor in earning an at-large berth. It can be the deciding factor in getting seated higher, so you have a home game in those 5, 12, 6, 11, 7, 10 games. It can be the deciding factor on if you win your league and it gets you a top 4 seed. So, I think there's a lot of value in it. it's for selfish reasons. I like the idea of playing different schools. I think fans would like that idea, but again, not at the cost of losing an Ohio State or a Michigan or Penn State. Like I just think of this season. I love that opener against Penn State, right, in week 1. Does that get taken away if all of a sudden you have to squeeze another alliance game into it? I don't like that idea at all.
No, I'm with you there. And one last thing is on the alliance here. Obviously, Notre Dame is always a conversation anytime any of these things comes up, is if they'll ever jump into a conference like they did last year because of COVID. And obviously they've got the relationship with the non-football sports with the ACC. I just wonder, the more and more things shift and teams consolidate and everything, like where the point is that Notre Dame has to, when does the balance come out of whack between the value of their NBC solo contract, right, and then versus being in a conference, and which one would they try to go to, or just have an agreement with the alliance as a whole? I mean, I know they haven't won a national championship in I don't know what 30 some odd years, 40, but they're still one of the marquee names and one of the biggest draws on TV in the sport, and they're one of the most important programs in the sport. And it's just funny to see them have to have their names involved and then also kind of sit out these things as they happen.
Yeah, it's still Notre Dame. I mean, they're always going to have a seat at the table. So I'll be interested to see where they kind of fall. I think you're right, though. The more things shift, it kind of forces them into some sort of decision, I would think. The other thing I wanted to mention with the scheduling, and we've talked all about football here, but I do like the idea of men's basketball and women's basketball having more scheduling options too with this alliance. Kevin Warren, I don't know how serious this is, but Kevin Warren threw out the idea of tournaments, and mid-season games. Yeah, I mean that to me is intriguing. If you have Wisconsin going out and playing Oregon or whatever, and Florida State comes along, it's just that type of stuff. I think for men's basketball and women's basketball would be big. So I think there's a lot to like, and the Olympic sports too. I think there's some value to be gained from them. I just don't want to look at this in strictly football terms.
I hear you there. All right, so from that, let's transition to more football, talking about some Badger positions here, finishing up our position breakdown series. And we're starting to release our position breakdowns from our preview section, which comes out on Sunday. You can go on madison.com and check it out. By the time you guys hear this, we'll have quarterbacks, running backs, and I believe wide receivers up there. So you can check all that stuff out at madison.com. Those are going to be coming every day until the start of the season. Starting quickly here with the cornerbacks. We've talked a lot about this defense and how well it's been playing. And I think one of the things that's jumped out to me throughout camp is how aggressive the corners have been playing the ball. And, when you're in practice and there's not a risk of giving up, or the risk of giving up a big play isn't as drastic, you like to see that. And you like to see these guys fighting through the catch and punching some balls out, which they have been. And I feel really good about the top, I'd say 2 or 3 guys when you look at Caesar Williams, Faion Hicks, and then whoever ends up being the main third guy between Alexander Smith and Dean Ingram, or whatever rotation of those two it is. My question is, when you get beyond them, if one of those guys gets hurt, or when you play a team that you're going to have more corners out there, I didn't see a ton out of guys like Samar Melvin or Duron Harrell, Dante Burton. Like some of these guys that have played snaps before, had their struggles. I just haven't seen enough improvement or really kind of splash plays out of those guys to feel great about that group as a whole, even though I like that top group.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that. That's where I was going to go with this, from a little bit different perspective, because I'm always like the future, look ahead to the future type guy. I want somebody to emerge, 1 or 2 guys to emerge from that group, so you feel better once this season ends about how things are going to look post Faion Hicks and Caesar Williams. And I agree with you. I don't know that we saw standouts from the Melvins and Burtons. We say this every year, but there's a lot of guys in that group, right? And a lot of guys with promise in that group. And it seems like every year we're kind of waiting for them to emerge and have more consistency. And I just don't know that we saw that necessarily at least in the practices we got to see. Now, the caveat here, and I kind of use this when the offense was struggling, is we're not there every day, right? I mean, we could be there on Friday and then not get in again until Monday. You have no idea what happened on Saturday and Sunday. So we don't have the complete picture. But from what we saw, I thought there's still questions to be answered from that group that I hope would, I hope those guys would emerge a little bit better than what we saw.
I'm with you. And I spent a lot of Friday and Saturday's practices, the last two that we saw, looking at Ricardo Hallman in that same kind of idea, like who's the next guy once these seniors leave. And he's got a lot of the raw tools you want. You can just tell like there's still a lot of catching up to the speed of how quickly guys break in college, how precise they are. And, not for nothing, he was also going against Kendrick Pryor and Chimere Dike quite a bit when I was watching him. So it's nice that he was up for that challenge and was doing his best, but those are also two really good, skilled guys. So tough battle for a freshman. I think that the top group of corners is going to be on the field a lot more than in years past where we've seen a lot of rotation from this group. Jim Leonard has said multiple times they'll play the hot hand, right? Like that's kind of his mindset with that group. Who's playing the most confident, who's playing the best at that time is going to play. I just don't see that that second group, that second tier of the cornerback room being able to push the top group hard enough to really take many snaps away from them.
Yeah, I will say this about that top group though. There was so much talk about how much this offense struggled. I do think those guys, like you said, deserve credit, right? I mean, I don't know that Graham Mertz was missing open receivers very often.
I would agree with that.
There just weren't open receivers. And that I think speaks to a large degree to guys like Hicks and Williams and the safeties and Ingram and Smith. I mean, I think it's a good top four, but I'd like to see a legit 5 and 6 emerge at some point. And maybe that's stuff that happens in the offseason. Maybe that's bowl prep where guys take steps. Maybe that's next spring where guys take steps. It's I don't want to make it sound like it's an now or never thing because it's not, but I really hope that, the one guy that really stood out was Armand Williams.
Armand Williams.
It was really nobody knew anything about him, and he's a walk-on from Milwaukee, but he was constantly around the ball. And I asked Jim Leonard one day after practice, like, I don't know what his role will be, right? But did it stand out to you that he's a guy that's constantly seems to be in the mix? And he's like, yeah, he likes his competitiveness and feistiness, and so I don't know where he fits, but we didn't see enough of that, I guess, from Samar Melvin and Dante Burton.
Yeah, no, that's a good way of putting it. The other thing that I think adds to the pressure that's on this cornerback group is that week one, you've got two of the best receivers in the conference in Parker Washington and Jahan Dotson coming in from Penn State. And that's going to be a crazy matchup. And we're going to talk all about it next week in our preview pod. But yeah, this top group is going to get tested about as well as you can be tested in this conference right away with those two guys. And that matchup between Hicks and Dotson, because I think if I'm Jim Leonard, I don't let Faion Hicks cover anybody else or let Jahan Dotson get covered by anybody else. I think that's going to be fascinating to watch all game. So it's a great test for this group right away. And thankfully that whole top group is healthy, because if they went into this game against Penn State with some of those guys out, I would feel very concerned about what they can do through the air.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I got asked a question about this in my mailbag about Penn State, and I think they're going to be able to. I think their offense is going to be much more consistent than it was last year. Sean Clifford kind of took a step back last year. They have a new offensive coordinator. I expect Clifford to be more like the 2019 version. I think he's got a good running game to support him, and like you said, he's got some top end receivers. I think this is going to be a really tough test for Wisconsin in week one, the UW defense.
For sure. Let's jump over the safeties here, Jim. And the thing that I saw in the spring and I continue to see here in the fall was that Jim Leonard is going to put these guys all over the field. There are plays where you're going to see Scott Nelson or Colin Wilder, like walk down basically to a defensive line spot where they're like standing just outside a tight end or a tackle, or, at linebacker depth, or when they go single high, way back, like 15-ish yards. I like that there's a lot of versatility there. And I know I've brought this concern up a couple of times to you when we're watching practice, and I think on this podcast as well, but the lack of top end speed from those guys, I'm not saying they're slow, but they're not, wide receiver fast, or, they're not one of the faster defensive backs on the field. That's concerning to me, because if there's one thing that this cornerback / this whole secondary, I should say, the deep ball might be there if the pressure doesn't get there. Like Jim Leonard's going to be aggressive up front. It's going to let up some at least chances for deep passes if the coverage doesn't stay back and lets guys get behind them. That's probably my biggest concern for the safety group. As talented and versatile as things they are, I'm just very concerned about them getting beat deep, because they're not as fast as what we've seen from some other groups at the safety spot.
Yeah, and I alluded that, like, I had a couple national championship questions and how close this team is and what you would take from other rosters to.
I like that one. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a good question. I avoided specific names slightly, but I do think, and we talked about this yesterday before I answered it. I think if you're looking at where Wisconsin differs from the Alabamas, Clemsons, Ohio States of the world, one position is the defensive, is the secondary, cornerback and safety. Like those teams almost every year have top end, like first round draft picks at those positions. And it's a difference maker. If you can have a safety that has speed / the ability to come up and make plays, it's such a game changer. And you said, you're right. Scott Nelson's a guy that can do that. He can come up and make plays, but you do worry about their speed in the back end when they're going up against the Penn States and later on Ohio State, right? Like Ohio State might have the best wide receiver crew in the country.
Yeah.
Chris Olave and others. And so that's where you really are concerned, is if they can match that speed. And that is a legitimate concern from this group, as experienced as it is. I mean, there's a ton of experience in that secondary, but are they athletic enough to match the really, really high end receivers that they're going to meet in big games this season?
For sure. And one potential answer for that would be a guy like Travion Blaylock, who has stayed healthy in the last probably 3 weeks of camp after missing the first week or so. And it's a guy that is very clearly in that second group. It's him and John Torchio were running most of that second unit at the safety spot. And we've heard Jim Leonard for a year plus talk about how talented Blaylock is, what he thinks he can do, and comparing him to like a guy like Natrell Jamerson when he was here. So I think there's some hope that maybe Blaylock, if you get into one of those matchups like a Penn State or Ohio State down the road, something like that, we've got a really good receiving core that's challenging you deep and trying to beat you with speed, that he might be able to come in and do that. But then he's one of those guys that and we saw it a couple of times during camp and throughout his career, like it's one, it's tough for him to stay on the field. And then two, it's, he trusts his athleticism to try to make up against double moves and things, and it doesn't work all that often. And against some of the better receivers, that's what they beat you on, right? They beat you on that second move that creates a separation. So I think Blaylock's going to play a interesting role, and I'm intrigued to see how he gets mixed and matched in. And he might be able to help with that speed issue. I'm just that speed also comes with a little bit of inconsistency in his play, which is probably the reason that he's not a starter.
He's a little bit in that Samar Melvin, Dante Burton category, right? Where guys that are now in their third and fourth year in the programs that you would expect to be a little further advanced than they are, and guys you're kind of waiting for to take that next step. Maybe this is a year where it all comes together, where the light bulb goes on and he's more confident. Because you'd hope so, because you're right. He has the tools, he has the body, he has the skills. So now you just have to put it all together.
Yeah, I'm with you there. All right, let's run through the specialists quick. Lots of the same guys that we've seen over the last couple of years. Sophomore Jack Van Dyke appears to be the number one kicker. He was out for a few weeks during camp with a right leg injury. Chris said on Tuesday that he expects Van Dyke back for the opener. So to me, that would say that he'd be back in that starting kicking role. At punter, you've got Andy Vunovich looking to have a much more consistent year. We saw the bombs that he would be able to hit against, especially his first one against Illinois, goes for 60 yards. And then I think it was 3 punts later, he had a 33-yarder. So get some more consistency there and even out that average. It'll be pretty good for that unit. In the return game, I think pretty clearly the number one kick returner will be Devin Chandler. The punt return game is one that's a little bit open in that we've seen Chandler back there, we've seen Dean Ingram back there, and then also guys like Jack Dunn and Danny Davis from the receiver group. That's probably the spot that I'm most intrigued about, is that punt return, because I think last year, and this has been confirmed to me about to a couple of players, the punt return group last year was basically don't fumble, catch the ball, and let's get the offense out there. Like, let's not do anything too crazy. I think they're going to be a lot more aggressive this year. Chris Herring, when I talked to him at Media Day, has said, like, we've got to make some plays on special teams. We can't just rely on, not screwing up. We've got to be more aggressive there. And I think with guys like Chandler, Ingram, even Danny Davis, like, I'm a little concerned having a guy as important to the offense as Davis back there catching punts and taking some big open field hits that are possible. But I mean, try to get some more playmakers, the ball in their hands in space, and see what happens, because I think if you go into this year and expect, to be a championship level team, you've got to make some plays in special teams. And that's one of those areas that's been one of the differentiators between Wisconsin and the best teams, is there's just not a lot of spark from the Badgers special teams outside of a couple of kick returns a few years ago from Aaron Cruikshank.
You mentioned the risk of putting a guy like Davis out there in terms of injury concerns. And that's I've always kind of leaned that way. Now, I think there are special cases where if you need a spark, if you're something where you can put him back there and it's worth the risk, I think. But I don't know that I want to see him out there consistently. I just don't know that you want to. I mean, last year, the passing game just completely fell apart when he and Pryor got hurt. And I just don't want to think you want to end up in that position again. I think losing one of those guys is, really leaves you in a tough spot. So I guess I would lean towards Ingram or Chandler doing that job, especially a guy like Chandler, who I think, has been really, he's provided sparks with the ball in his hands at times. I would try to get him more touches. I just don't think those touches are going to come in the passing game. We talked about this yesterday, and in trying to spread out the targets, they're just, he's got 3 really good receivers ahead of him, and I just don't see him getting a lot of targets in the passing game.
Yeah, I am very much aboard the Devin Chandler train. Like, I think make him your Aaron Cruikshank type of guy, where he's your lead returner on both units, and just give him chances and not have to get him the ball through the air passing or on the jet sweeps. Like, make him your key returner. I don't see a lot of negative there. I mean, obviously, I've like we mentioned before, only seen like half the practices or a little bit less, but I don't see any reason why he shouldn't be. My only guess was, and I don't know, like, I haven't sat down and done the actual kind of guessing the numbers, but because he's not going to be super involved with the offense, maybe he's on the travel roster bubble. Maybe, I don't know. I say that knowing he's probably going to be the kick returner, so he'll probably be back there anyway. But maybe he's on that bubble, and they want to make sure that if he, let's say they leave him off, they've got options at both spots that are ready to go and have practiced quite a bit. So if they need to add somebody else as opposed to a Chandler, that there's that option there.
That's interesting. I mean, and it also just could be that they really just trust Dean Ingram more. And for all this talk about wanting to be more dynamic, the number one priority still is to hold on to the ball and make sure. I mean, I understand the going for all the positives you can get, but you do want to avoid the negatives, and that's got to be step number one. And he, I felt comfortable when he was back there. So I don't know. I think he can provide some plays. Maybe he's not as dynamic as Chandler, but he's that kind of happy middle guy.
Yeah, that's a fair point too. And one thing I want to kind of tease you listeners with, are still with us right now. Braylon Allen has been very consistently in that second group that's right in front of the main kick returner. So any pooch kick, any shorter kickoff, that might be a chance where we see Braylon Allen with the ball in his hands in space and good luck tackling him. There's going to be a lot of business decisions made if he gets to full speed with the ball in his hands.
He's not just a straight ahead runner. That's the thing that really stood out to me, is that he's got a little bit of wiggle to him for a guy that big. And so that's why I'm excited by his career. I know there's a lot of people that want to see him right away. I just don't think he's ready yet to be the one of the top two, and probably not even the third running back at this point. But I think there is a bright future there. And I think in time, he's going to be a guy that carries the ball an awful lot for this team.
Yeah, I'm with you. There's a lot of raw stuff that needs to get refined right now, but if that happens,
17, like, I just can't. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's hard to. It's easy to forget that he still has not turned 18 yet, and he should be one game into his senior year in high school.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. I talked to him on Monday when he walked up. I'm like, dude, you're unreal. Like, just physically, like, you don't see high schoolers that stacked and that just the way that he is put together. It's pretty ridiculous.
I don't know what you thought, but I was impressed by his not just his physical, but just he seemed a little bit wise beyond his years to me. Like, he's 17,
I agree.
And I thought he was, and for a guy who's had this much written and hyped about him, I just thought he seems to be handling it really well. Very well spoken. I thought he was a humble guy, kind of knows what he needs to work on. And so I walked away, I've been impressed by just how he is physically, obviously. But he just stood out as one of those guys that is 17, but doesn't seem anywhere close to being 17.
Yeah, no, I agree. That was an impression I got as well. And to have those physical tools, but then also understand that he's not quite there as a running back. He's got to become more of an all-around guy. That takes some maturity, because when you're that physically gifted, I can imagine the mentality of being like, oh, I'll figure it out, right? Like, just put me out there and I'll make stuff happen. But he seems to have a good head about where he's at and what he's got to do to get to that top tier of the running back room. Jim, it's pick time. It is now the debut of our Big Ten picks. I don't have the file in front of me right now, but I know Jim killed me last year. Yeah, it is convenient. You're right. But I know Jim killed me last year. It was a drubbing, but we are going to get back on track this year. We have one Big Ten game here in week 0. This was supposed to be out in Ireland. Unfortunately, with COVID and everything else happening, this will be in Champaign instead. But we have Nebraska going to Illinois for a week 0 game. Jim, the line is Nebraska -7. What do you got?
I'm taking Illinois, and I know we've had this talk before. I think probably on the way to Indianapolis. Illinois has so much experience coming back, including a bunch of sixth-year seniors. And your take is, well, Jim, it's bad experience, right? Those were bad players coming back, and I get that. But I think that's important, especially early in the season, to have some sort of continuity with a new coaching staff, especially on the offensive line. I just think they're going to keep this game close. And then part of it is just I'm not ready to say that Nebraska is who they want to be yet. I just don't think that they're there yet. By the way, quick aside, did you see Scott Frost's season opening news conference Monday was like 5 minutes and 42 seconds or something?
Well, that's like 5.5 minutes for 20 questions. I almost retweeted it being like, don't give Paul Christ ideas, but I decided not to because I didn't want that.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. I mean, so I think the takeaway was that he's in game mode. He understands how serious this thing is. He's obviously got other things kind of swirling around his program. It's do or die time with him. It's year 4. It's been an awful start for a guy that was supposed to be the savior. So I get that there's urgency, and maybe they walk in there and win by 3 touchdowns. But I think this game's going to be closer than a touchdown. I think they might win it, but I think it'll be close.
All right, so you are correct in my opinion that that's not great experience coming back for Illinois. A lot of guys have lost a lot of games. I don't know how valuable that is. But here's my other point. They're experienced in doing something completely different. This is a completely new offensive and defensive system that Brett Bielema and his staff brought in. And to me, it's good that they've got the veteran experience of being in games and all that stuff. But like the fact that they're going to be doing something completely different early on in the season. I mean, week 0, obviously they get to adjust their training camp. They start a little bit earlier because they're playing in week 0. But to me, having those guys back, but doing something completely different is the same as having a young guy out there, essentially. Maybe not in terms of physicality and ability to, when you mentioned the lineman, being able to block, and there's not as many changes there. But I just think that the amount of changes that have happened to the Illinois program as a whole, it's tough for me to expect them to come out and play well right away. But then my number two thing is what you kind of alluded to there. Nebraska's got kind of a storm hanging over right now, right? With the accusations or the investigation into their use of analysts and all this stuff, doing some improper things last season. If you're Scott Frost, your job's already on the line because you're not winning enough. You haven't been to a bowl game in his time there, right? So you have a winnable game in front of you. And in my opinion, you got a 3-year starter at quarterback. Is Adrian Martinez amazing? No, he's fine. He's a solid player, but he's a 3-year starter and a guy that knows exactly what you guys want to do on offense. And this Illinois team, I'm not as high on. I don't think they're super talented yet. This is a game that you've got to lay a smackdown. Like, you've got to go out and win by a lot. You've got to, if you have a chance, you haven't won a ton of Big Ten games and you haven't won very many decidedly. Like, this is one you've got to do. So I'm going to lay the 7 with Nebraska. And this is more of a pick of, like, the desperation is all on the Nebraska side. Illinois, this is Brett Bielema's first year. It's his first game. There's going to be some excitement around that part of it. But I think Illinois is going to be in a mode of, like, all right, there's a lot of changes that need to happen. He's already doing a pretty good job recruiting if you look at how he's starting to take command back of the Illinois as a state. So I think he's going to need a year or two to get his house in order, and I don't think he's going to get as much pressure. So I think this is a desperation play by Nebraska. Make this as big a win as possible because you don't know how many are going to be on your schedule.
Fair enough. I mean, I guess it's funny how two people can see a situation different. Like, we both agree that there's, pressure on Nebraska. You seem to think they're going to use it as a good thing. I wonder whether these storm clouds hovering over are just more distractions that a program that can't seem to stop from tripping over itself. It just seems to be one more thing that they have to deal with. But we will see at noon on Saturday.
I am so excited to be at football season and just watch a meaningful game. I've watched more preseason football than I care to admit, and it's awful. It is. I would much rather watch like a MAC game or like a lower level FCS game than a lot of this preseason stuff. But I'm just a need football, Jim, and I'm so ready for a meaningful game, especially a Big Ten game to start the year.
I actually came home. I recorded the Packers second exhibition game because my son had a soccer tournament, so I couldn't watch it live. I just feel like I have to watch this team, but I can safely say that's the first time I've ever recorded and watched an exhibition, an NFL preseason game. That just has never happened before.
That's fair. Did your son continue to dominate that soccer game? Because I know when we talked, it was like 22-2 aggregate score between the games.
I don't know if I told you. So they had outscored their opponents, I think, like 26-1 in their first 3 games. The team they played Sunday had outscored their opponents 45-1.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, so it was only a 2-0. His team lost 2-0 on Sunday. It was a good game. They played really well, and it was good for them. I think they needed to be humbled a little bit after the way Saturday went. But yeah, I kind of knew once I looked and saw what the other team had done in its first 3 games. I'm like, it's about to get real here.
For sure.
And this was U11 soccer talk on the podcast.
Yeah, we will go all over to talk about sports. Don't worry, everybody. All right. As we wrap up the show, as I mentioned before, our preview section for the year is going to come out on Sunday. This is one of those times that Jim and I are going to be old school newspaper people and tell you to go get a paper. A lot of work goes into the design of it and make it look cool and some of the graphics and other things that you're going to see. We'll probably review it more next week, but I've got a really big feature on Graham Mertz coming out sometime this weekend. I don't know when the exact rollout is, but it'll be in that Sunday section previewing the Badger season. A lot about what he did over the offseason to get better and to improve not only as a player, but as a person. So a lot of good stuff in there. I know Jim took over the top 5 around the Big Ten column that's always really popular, and a lot of other really good stuff. So go out and get a paper. If you're not already subscribed on madison.com, do that. All that good stuff helps us out. And this is going to be an exciting season. We're 10 days away, and this is going to be really fun for, I think, the Badgers this year. The first month of the year is going to be so many massive games. I know you've got the Eastern Michigan game kind of in the middle there, but you've got Penn State, Notre Dame within a month of each other. It's go time right away. And then the week after that, it's Michigan. So it's right. Go time.
I was just going to say that, like, just a month from now, if you fast forward a month, we're going to know so much more about this team. Having played Penn State and Notre Dame, but you're really going to know the direction this season is going to go. I mean, if they can get through that first month undefeated, all of a sudden the hype train really gets rolling. So yeah, I'm after watching, I know how those guys get after going against each other in camp, and the same thing watching them is just, you want to see them against another team just to kind of get some actual real data and find out what this team is about. And so we're going to find out pretty quickly with this team.
Absolutely. All right. For Jim Polzin, I am Colten Bartholomew. Thank you guys very much for listening.